Hello, my name is Adam and this is Prolific Today. And today we're going to be reading psychological commentaries on the teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Maurice Nicoll. And this is a book that I've started reading and it's really resonated with me personally. So I've decided to share it with you. Let me know what you think. Let me know if it resonates with you. And hopefully it'll help you in your journey. Here we go. And just as a side note, I'm going to be adjusting it for modern times, so trying to get rid of that man and he all the time and just kind of make it more people and they, just a little bit more appropriate to modern times and also approachable by more than just men. Anyway, there we go. On work on oneself. It's necessary to work on oneself today. Each day is an epitome of one's life. Maybe we can replace one's with your to make it more modern sounding. Each day is an epitome of your life. Your life is what remains at death. That is, a person is their life. And this is what is meant when it's said in the scriptures that the book of one's life, or you should say your life, the book of your life, or the book of life is opened at death. A person is his life. Okay, it says a man is his life, but I'm going to make it a person is their life. A day in your life is a small replica of your life. If a person doesn't work on a day in their life, they cannot change their life. And if they say that they wish to work on their life and change it, and they don't work on a day in their life, their work on themselves remains purely imaginary. They solace themselves with the imagination that they are going to work on their life and actually never begin to work on a single day in their life. Your life is broken up into days and years. If a person doesn't work on a day of their life by self-observation, by means of applying the ideas of this work practically to what they observe, there is no starting point. They say perhaps that they will work tomorrow. You remember the saying that we will have jam tomorrow, but it's always tomorrow. If a person says, I will begin to work on myself tomorrow, then they will never work on themselves. For it's always tomorrow that they will work and never today. This is sometimes called in the work the disease of mañana, tomorrow. As long as a person always says mañana, says that is tomorrow, they'll never change. In order to work on yourself, it's necessary to circumscribe the field of work. That is, not to dream idly of working in the future on some grand occasion, but to work today. To circumscribe practical work to today. That is, to this very day and its events, not think in terms of tomorrow. Have you begun to observe yourself in regard to the day, the ordinary, every reoccurring day that's the cosmically determined miniature of the year and of your whole life? You all know that saying, sufficient unto the day, is the evil thereof. But have you thought what this saying means? And have you considered the context in which Christ made this remark? What, for instance, does it mean when it said sufficient? Sufficient for what? It is sufficient to work on the evil of today. If a person begins to work even a little on the day and its vexations and troubles, they then begin to work practically on themselves. But they must get to know this day their day and get to know themselves in relation to their day. There is a certain average day that each person passes through, apart from very unusual events. The events of the ordinary day have, as you will admit, a certain recurring similarity for each person. Now suppose that a person never realizes this and never observes themselves in connection with the typical events of their average day. How can they even think they're working on themselves, and how can they even suppose they can change themselves? Change of being begins with changing your reactions to actual incidents of the day. This is the beginning of taking your life in a real and practical sense in a new way. If you behave in the same way every day to the same recurring events of the day, how can you believe that you can change? To get to know yourself, begin with observing your behavior towards the events of a single day in your life. Notice how you react. That is, notice your mechanical reactions to all the little events that happen and to other people. And notice what you say, feel, think, and so on. Then try to see how you can change these reactions. Of course, if you're certain that you always behave consciously and rationally, and that you're never in the wrong and so on, nothing will ever change in you. For you'll never be able to realize that you are a machine, a mechanical person. Always saying and feeling and thinking and doing typical things according to changing circumstances over and over again. But perhaps owing to a grain of modesty, or a sense of humiliation, or better still, owing to increasing consciousness of yourself, you may realize that you're not one, not a fully conscious individual, willing their life consciously at every moment, but at one moment a mean person, at the next an irritable person, at the next a benevolent person, and the next a scandalous or slanderous person, at the next a saint, at the next a liar. Try to make the work exercise of behaving consciously for a small part of one day in your life, because everything we do affects us forever. A single moment in which you're conscious enough to not behave mechanically, if it is done willingly, can change many future results. If you learn, say, a little French today, and you will learn more tomorrow, but if you do nothing today, you will know nothing more tomorrow. It's the same with work on yourself, but you must work willingly on yourself, and not because you're told to. To work sullenly or for merit is one thing. To work on yourself because you dislike something in yourself and long to alter it is another thing. Our whole manner of taking a day in our lives is wrong because by habit it gets fixed and so mechanical. Then indeed we are mechanical, and so have no real feeling of what we're doing, and our days pass in a strange, unfelt way. For example, we follow the mechanical habits of the day and so have no real life and take in no new impressions. It acts, that is, the machine. But if a person starts their day consciously, the whole day may be rather different for them. But they must get to know what it means to work on themselves, taking their life as a day, to see, observe, and realize what a day is for them, and not think that a day for them is unimportant because it's so usual, and that work means something in the future, or that work is something they have no chance yet to apply to themselves because they're so busy with their day's work. As someone once said to me in a serious manner, "How do you get up? In what mood are you at breakfast? What always upsets you?" And so on. Please don't think that to change yourself is merely to smoke less or eat less. Remember, this work is psychological. our daily life, our profession, our trade, our occupation, etc., are nothing but a dream with which we identify. But this understanding comes slowly. When we understand better what sleep and mechanicalness mean, and why mankind is called asleep and life is called mechanical, to work on yourself, begin to work on daily life, and then you'll understand what is meant by the strange phrase, "Give us this day our daily bread," in the Lord's Prayer. For the word daily here means in the Greek supersubstantial bread or bread from above. The ideas of this work are to give us bread for life, in the double sense of ideas and force to meet with the troubles of daily mechanical life, and so supersubstantial bread, and to feed a new life beginning in yourself. For in the work, everyone seeks to become a new person. Now no one can alter their life or change anything in regard to their mechanical reactions to this daily life unless they have the help of new ideas and are helped by the force coming from these new ideas and the new thoughts that are born in their mind if they begin to understand them. Remember that the slightest thing counts in regard to mechanical reaction to ordinary daily life. The slightest negative reaction matters, and the slightest wrong thinking about yourself or another, or internal considering, or negative imagination, and so on. To prepare lower centers to receive the ideas and force always coming from higher centers, but not heard, as it were, owing to our heavy inner state of sleep, is long work, but every attempt done willingly to correct or separate from a negative reaction, every attempt to remember yourself in the presence of a difficulty, every act of sincere observation of yourself, as when you are lying or showing off or making yourself overimportant from false personalities, or twisting the truth to injure another, helps to make right connections in lower centers, and so to prepare them for conjunction with higher centers and the help that comes from them. So here's a note. Now let's speak for a moment on personal work at the present moment in which the added fact of war exists. A person in this work has to insulate themselves from the effects of life, otherwise they're eaten up, as it were, by life. All work on yourself is connected with insulating yourself so that something can grow and develop which cannot do so under the influence of life, because life does not develop anything beyond personality in us, and this, though necessary, is not yet the development of the real part of us, but something artificial. If a person doesn't insulate themselves but identifies with everything and wastes their force in negative emotions, in considering, imagining, and mechanical talking, and so on, nothing can develop in them beyond what they are mechanically. Actually, in esotericism, a person must become hermetically sealed, as an ancient phrase puts it, and this refers to something internal of which we will speak at some other time, connected with the power of silence. The phrase belongs to the language of ancient times when there existed a teaching on people's inner evolution connected with the name of Hermes, or Hermes, I'm not sure which one that is. Apart from this, you can understand that if you leak all the time and have no insulation from life, there will never be enough force in you to lead to the growth of anything in you. You will not be able to even to develop ordinary accomplishments. So it's necessary to learn how to hold off things and struggle against life each day. That's why it's said sometimes that this work is against life. At least this is one meaning. But if you have fundamentally a wrong attitude to life and believe that everything should go right in life, you will take even the most ordinary troubles as exceptional and be continually disappointed and upset and lose force and simply be a weak person. That is, weak in life. A great deal of sentimental nonsense is spoken and written about life. But you don't meet this in the work. The work says life is mechanical and humanity is asleep and people can't do and everything happens. Yet people cannot believe this, even when terrible things take place, and imagine it's due to this, that, or that person, and that it's exceptional, and so on. All this is due to a wrong attitude. You remember what the definition of a good householder is in the system. A person who does their duty and is a responsible person, etc., but who does not believe in life. Now you will see that here lies a very difficult thing to understand. So difficult that I'm not going to say anything more about it except that in these times it's very important not to let what happens in life weaken your thoughts and feelings and experience of the work itself in the way that it does to so many ordinary people who, seeing the horror of war, feel convinced that there can be no meaning in things and no God. Remember, the work says that life is mechanical and people are asleep. It doesn't, in other words, start from any false ideas of the nature of life or the nature of people. If you take the outer scene, that is life, as your criterion and standard, do you not see how the war can drag you down and make you lose force? Now can you see, if you have a work attitude to life, this war can increase the reality of the work. Try to find out what's meant in what I have briefly said and try to act upon it. That is, try to think from the ideas of the work and so get the right attitude to this life on earth, where, as you know, we are under so many laws, where indeed we're in almost the worst part of the whole creation. You've often heard it said that in this work it is necessary to transform impressions, and that this is the essence of the first conscious shock, as it's called. I know that many of you don't understand the nature in a practical way of the first conscious shock, and simply say that it means self-remembering. But a word does not explain what it means. The transformation of daily life, that is, of its impact upon us, depends on understanding all that has been taught you about practical work, about self-observation and work on negative states, work on identifying, and so on. It is this that insulates you, when you realize that you need to not take a thing or a person in the way you are taking yourself. Self-remembering, not identifying, and not considering all help to insulate us from the influences of life. Acting consciously at a different moment has the same effect. Similarly, if you experience a moment or a real consciousness, a moment of self-remembering, you will feel that it is just as if you were insulated from life, and that nothing could touch you, and such would be the case if you were always in a state of self-remembering. Our task is to try to imitate higher states of consciousness so as to attract them. Okay, so that was actually further on in the book. This is around page 25. Okay, I'm going to go back and read a little bit more. On additional means of self-observation. Can you observe the difference between your own life and life in general? What do you mean by the term my life? As when you say, my life has been a happy life, or my life has been an unhappy life. Do you mean that outside things have been pleasant or otherwise, or inside things? That your moods and feelings and so on have been pleasant or otherwise? You'll agree with me that sometimes a person who is in a good external situation in life, with enough money and with pleasant surroundings and without any serious trouble, is unhappy and miserable, and on the other hand that a person in a very different and even adverse circumstances is often quite the reverse. Let's look at this situation more closely. What's your life? This thing we talk of so glibly without seeing what it is. When people gratuitously wish to tell the history of their lives, what do they speak of? They speak of events, of other people, of external things. But your life consists of two distinct things, which for the purpose of self-observation must be realized. Your life consists not only of events, but of states. States are inner and events are outer. States are states of yourself. That's inner states, such as bad moods, habits of worrying, habits of fear, superstitions, forebodings, depression, and on the other hand, better states, states of feeling happy, states of enjoyment and mercy. They are in yourself, in you. That is, all states are states of yourself, of you. Events are external and come into us from outside. Now, your inner state may correspond to an external event, or may be caused by it, or may have no relation to it. But it's necessary to try to see that states and events are two different things. First of all, before thinking of how they may be connected together, take for instance a pleasant event. Does your inner state correspond with it? Can you say for certain that when the outer event occurs, your inner state corresponds to it? Say you know some desirable event is going to happen, and you look forward to it. Can you say that when it does come about, your inner state can meet with it in a delightful way? Or will you admit that though the event happens, perhaps even as you hoped, something frequently is lacking? What is lacking? What is lacking is the corresponding inner state to combine, as it were, with the outer event that was so eagerly anticipated. And as you probably all know, it's usually the entire unexpected event that affords us our best moments. Now let's take this idea, namely the correspondence of inner states and outer events. Unless we have in ourselves the right state, we can't combine rightly with the happy event. That's to say, something in us must exist to engage with and so enjoy the outer event. Yet people are very much inclined in thinking of their lives, as I said, to believe that their lives are only outer events, and that if a certain number of outer events of one kind or another have or have not happened to them, their lives have been unfortunate. But a person's capacity for life depends on their inner development, that is, on the quality of their inner states. For internally, in regard to our states, lies the apparatus for living. And if this apparatus is, for example, swamped by self-pity and worry and other negative emotions, no matter how delightful the outer events, nothing can happen rightly, simply because the apparatus for living, that is, the person in themselves, is quite unable to combine in a fortunate way with such events that come from external life that might give them some pleasure and delight. A person may look forward to a trip abroad, and when it comes about, it's an event. But they may be so mean, so careful about small unimportant things that the whole trip is nothing but a disaster. And in such a case, it will only be the person's inner state that is at fault. So if we ask ourselves what our life consists of, we can't say merely of events, but that it consists far more of states. Suppose that a person whose chief love is to be pessimistic and melancholy and gloomy complains to you that life is a bad business and not worth living. Will you suppose that this is caused by a lack of suitable events or by the person's inner states? And will you be so silly as to think by arranging a nice party for them they'll change? The disease is the person themselves. And how many people do you not observe every day who make their own life and the lives of others miserable owing to their wicked inner states, and who in fact deserve imprisonment because they have not begun to see what their own inner lives, really are and imagine life as it is called, as being something altogether outside them. Now, in self-observation, try to distinguish between outer events and inner states, and notice where you are standing, both in relation to your inner states and to the nature of the outer event. Outer events are of any kind. Outer life is not a smooth sheet of paper that we're crawling over like ants. It's full of hills and valleys, of good weather and bad weather. This is the nature of life. But as a rule, all events we take as exceptional, or at least unpleasant ones, as illness, war, etc. Life is a series of different events coming along on larger and smaller scales to meet you, and each event has its special nature. And inner states are again of every kind. All personal work is about inner states, and you have all heard of what wrong states you must work on and try to separate yourselves from them. And the unpleasant events of life will not catch you, as it were, so easily and draw forth from you. Events are influences, changing at every moment in their various combinations, and some are better than others, but all have to be taken consciously, even good ones. At this low level, where we are in the universe, namely on the earth, and some of them are very dangerous and must not be identified with at all costs. From what has been said, it will become clearer that your life is more to be thought of as your inner states, and a true history of your life would be a history of your inner states and negative emotions especially. To live anyhow in yourself, in this internal vast world, accessible only to each person through individual self-observation and always invisible to others, is the worst crime we can commit. So this work begins with self-observation and noticing wrong states in yourself and working against them. In this way, the inner life becomes purified. And since our inner life attracts our outer life, by changing our inner states, starving some and nourishing others, we always alter not only our relation to events coming from outside, but even the nature of the events that come to us by day. Only in this way can we change the nature of events that happen to us. We cannot change them directly, but only through changing states. That is, through beginning to put this disorderly house we live in into some order. It's not the events of today that happen to you that matter, such as that you lost something or something went wrong or someone forgot you or spoke to you harshly, but how you reacted to it all. That is, what states of yourself you were in. For it's here that your real life lies. And if your inner states were right, nothing in the nature of external states could overcome us. Try, therefore, to distinguish, as an exercise in living more consciously, between inner states and outer events, and try to meet any outer event after noticing its nature with the right inner attitude. That's with the right state. And if you can't, think afterwards about it. First, try to define the nature of the event and notice if this kind of event often comes to you, and try to see it more clearly in terms such as this is called being late, or this is called losing things, or this is called receiving bad news, or this is called unpleasant surprises, or this is called hard work, or this is called being ill. Begin in this very simple way, and you will soon see how different personal events, and so how in this respect one's outer life, are changing all the time. What you could not do at one moment, you can do at another. For events, as it were, are like opening and shutting of doors. Then you will be able to see, in regard to the small events of daily life, what events are partly due to your own cause, and what are accidental, and so on. And then think about your state, and with what state you usually meet some rather typical events, and whether the state is, as it were, the right tool to use, the right ticket to offer, the right method to employ for that event. Towards very many events, one has to learn to be passive, For example, not to react at all, not to do anything. But to be passive demands a great inner activity of consciousness to prevent any mechanical reaction taking place when the event coming in as a mechanical impression touches the purely associative machinery of mind and feeling, which we mistakenly take as ourselves. Okay, so this chapter is called On Additional Means of Self-Observation. Section 1. The following is a commentary, which refers to the idea of different I's in us. As you know, in this system of teaching, people are not regarded as a unity. The lack of unity in a person is the source of all their difficulties and troubles. A person's body is a unity and works as an organized whole unless it's sick. But a person's inner life is not a unity and has not organization and does not work harmoniously as a whole. People, in regard to their inner state, are a multiplicity. And from one angle in this teaching, this inner multiplicity is spoken of in terms of I's, or egos in a person. A person has no one permanent I, but a host of different I's in them, that at each moment take charge of them and speak out of them, as if in their voice. And from this point of view, people are compared with a house in disorder, in which there is no master but a crowd of servants who speak in the name of the absent master. As you've probably all heard, it's the greatest mistake that can be made either to suppose that you or others have one permanent unchanging I or ego in them. A person is never the same for long. They're continually changing. But they imagine that if a person is called James, they will always be James. That's quite untrue. This person, whom we call James, has in him other I's, other egos, which take charge of him at different moments. And although perhaps James doesn't feel like telling lies, another I in him, let's call it Peter, likes to lie, and so on. To take another person as one and the same person at all times, to suppose their one single I is to do violence to them, and in some way is to do violence to yourself. A multitude of different people live in each of you. These are all the different I's belonging to personality, which is necessary to observe and try to get to know. Otherwise, no self-knowledge is possible. That is, if you don't seek self-knowledge and not invention and imagination about yourself. Not one of you here has a real permanent unchanging I. Not one of you here has real unity of being. All of you are nothing but a crowd of different people, some better and some worse, and each of these people, each of these I's in you, at particular moments takes charge of you and makes you do what it wants and say what it wishes and feel and think as it feels and thinks. But you already know all this, and I want to speak in more detail about this doctrine of many I's in a person and suggest to you about its deeper meaning and significance. If some of you cannot understand what follows, it's either because you have not yet had sufficient practice in self-observation, in which case you must be patient and wait a little, or it's because if you have been longer in the work, you have not even begun seriously to observe yourself yet. That is, you have not begun to work on yourself and perhaps even have never seriously thought what it means. In the latter case, I can only say that you must really try to make an effort to understand what it means through actual self-observation, and as soon as possible, for time is counted in the work, and opportunities begin of themselves to get fewer. If you do not take them while it's possible, it may, in the very nature of things, become too late to do anything in yourself in the way of inner change, which is only possible through self-observation and the self-knowledge that comes from it. The first point to which I will draw your attention in connection with the doctrine of many I's in a person is that as long as a person takes themselves as one, they cannot change. But have you thought of yourself, that is, from your own inner private thinking? Why is this so? You know that this work is to make a person think for themselves, and that to hear the ideas of this system without thinking about them for yourself, and so making them become part of yourself is so much a waste of time. The work is not something external, but internal, and people who imagine that the work as an external organization will carry them along are sadly mistaken about its meaning. The very fact that the work begins with self-observation surely is sufficient to show that demands a personal effort on the part of each individual, and only each of you can observe yourself, and no one else can do this for you. Now, it's only through the effort of self-observation that a person can eventually see for themselves that they're not one, and so break the illusion that they are one permanent, unvarying individual. For as long as a person has this illusion that they are always one and the same person, they cannot change. And as you know, the object of this work is to bring about gradual change in your inner life. In fact, the whole of this work is based on the idea that self-change or transformation of yourself is a definite possibility in everyone, and this is the real goal of existence. But the starting point of this self-change remains hidden as long as a person is under the illusion that they are one. A person must realize for themselves that they are not one but many, and they can only do this by means of critical observation of themselves. But for a long time, the illusion that they are always one and the same person will struggle with this attempt to observe themselves uncritically and make it difficult for them to realize the significance of their observations. They will find excuses and justify themselves, and so cling to the idea that they are really one and have a permanent individuality, and that they always know what they are doing and thinking and saying, and are always conscious of themselves and in control of themselves at all times. It will be very difficult for them to admit to themselves that this is not the case. And on the other hand, it'll be quite useless if they pretend to believe that they are not one, not see the truth of it for themselves. It's part of the knowledge of the system of teaching that people are not one but many. But merely as knowledge, it lies only in a person's memory. Unless a person sees the truth of this knowledge by applying it to themselves, by working on this being, it can't become understanding. A person may say, I know I am not one but many, the work says so. But that is nothing. The knowledge remains external to the person themselves. But if they apply this knowledge practically and through long self-observation begin to see the truth of it, then they'll say, I understand I am not one but many. And this is quite a different thing. The knowledge will have borne fruit in them, so to speak, and will no longer be merely knowledge but understanding, because the person has applied the knowledge to themselves and by means of it worked on their own being. And you will remember the great emphasis laid on this system, on the difference between knowledge and understanding, and how often it's said that in these times today knowledge has gone far beyond understanding, because people have developed only on the side of knowledge and not correspondingly on the side of being. When a person begins to observe themselves from the angle that they are not one but many, they begin to work on their being. They cannot do this if they remain under the conviction that they are one. For then they will not be able to separate themselves from themselves, for they will take everything in them, every thought, mood, feeling, impulse, desire, emotion, as themselves, that is, as I. But if they begin to observe themselves, they will then at that moment become two, an observing side and an observed side. And unless they divide themselves in this way and struggle to make this division more and more distinct, they will never be able to shift from where they are, because always taking everything that takes place in them as themselves, they will say I to all, and so everything will then be I in them. And by identifying themselves with everything that happens in themselves and taking it all as I, they'll make it impossible to change everything, for everything will hide itself behind this illusion of I and continue to live in them. In fact, the whole crowd of people in a person, the crowd of separate I's in them, both the useful and the useless, will have, as it were, equal rights and be equally protected by them, because they will be quite unable to distinguish them from one another, since they take them all as themselves. This is merely one way of putting the situation within a person who remains convinced that he is one. Now a person cannot begin to change until they're able, as a result of self-observation, to say, this is not I. As soon as they begin to say this internally to something, they begin to separate it from themselves. That is, they begin to take the feeling of I out of it. And the result is eventually, and often only after a struggle, that what they have observed begins to move away from them and so pass, as it were, into the distance in their inner world. But this is impossible if they think that what they have observed is themselves, for then it will still be I in them, and I cannot change I. For then no separation will be possible, and they will remain united with what they have observed by taking it as I, that is, as themselves, instead of taking it as an I in them. So, one of many. When a person is thinking, they believe that it is themselves thinking. But our thoughts come at random. Unless we're thinking deeply and with attention, which is very rare, the thoughts that pass across our minds come from different eyes in us. Let's suppose a person notices that they are having negative thoughts about the work or about a person or something that has changed, that happened. Let's suppose that they take these thoughts as their own, as themselves, that is, as I. And let's also suppose that they feel some discomfort about them. They say to themselves, I must really not think in this way. This may have some result or it may not. But the point is that they're making a mistake, namely the mistake of taking all that happens within themselves as themselves, as I, as if they observe themselves rightly. They notice these thoughts not as themselves, but as coming from a negative I in them, which perhaps they know something about already. Let's suppose they know this I in themselves fairly well. They recognize at once that this I is talking in them and communicating its thoughts to them through the mental center and stirring up at the same time a particular kind of negative emotion. They do not for a moment take this negative I as themselves, but see it as something in them apart from themselves. As a result, what it says does not get power over them, because they are separate from it. But if they go to sleep in themselves, that is, if they cease to be conscious of what is going on in them and which eyes are close to them, they fall under its power and become identified with it. Imagine that it is themselves who are thinking in this way. By doing this, they strengthen the power of this negative I over them, because as you know, whatever we identify with at once has power over us. And the more often we identify with something, the more we are slaves to it. In regard to the work itself, our temptations lie exactly in negative eyes. That is, in eyes that hate the work because their lives in us are threatened by it. These negative eyes start certain kinds of thoughts through acting on the mental centers and using the material stored there in the form of roles. If we go with these thoughts, and that is, with these negative eyes that are at the moment working in us, we're unable to shake off their effect. The first effect is to make us feel a loss of force. Whenever we feel a sudden loss of force, it's practically always due to the action of negative I, which has started a train of thought from our memories, and by carefully selecting its material, presented something in a wrong light. And it must be remembered that all negative eyes can only lie, just as all negative emotions can only distort everything. As for instance, the emotion of suspicion. Unless we can observe the action of the negative eyes in the mental center, it will gain power over us. It will gain power instantly if we take it as I, as ourselves. But if we see it as I at work in us, it cannot do so. But in order to realize that it is an I in us, we must already have become certain by practical work on ourselves that many different I's exist in us, and that we are not one, but many. Section 2. let us return to the illusion everyone has that he is one. This illusion exists in each of you. It can only be discovered gradually by personal observation. Each of you ascribes to themselves the position of individuality, and not only individuality, but full consciousness and will. But as you know, uh, this system of ideas that we're studying, teaches that people are not one, but many. That is, they are not one individual, but many different people, and also that they are not properly conscious, but nearly always sleep in dreams, in imagination, in considering, in negative emotions, and so on. And as a result, don't remember themselves, and so on. As it were, wastes and destroys their inner life, and lives in a sort of darkness. And finally, that they don't possess will, but have many different wills which conflict with one another and act in different directions. If a person were a unity instead of being a multiplicity, they would have true individuality. They would be one, and so would have one will. The illusion, therefore, that a person has about themselves, that they are one, refers to a possibility. People can attain unity of being. They can, first of all, in the way of a person's attainment of this possibility. That's not right. They can reach their true individuality, but it's precisely this illusion that stands, first of all, in the way of a person's attainment of this possibility. For as long as a person imagines they are something, they will not seek for it. Why should a person strive for something that they have never doubted for a moment they already possess? This is one of the effects of the imagination, which fills up, as it were, what is lacking, or makes it appear that we are like this or like that, even when actually we are the reverse. In this work, it is constantly said that we must struggle with imagination, and you must understand that this refers also to imagination about ourselves. It's necessary to struggle with our imagination about ourselves, not only because it puts us into false experiences, artificial emotions, and often ridiculous situations, but because it stops all possibility of inner growth. And it's easy now to see why this is so from what has been said already. For if we imagine that we have already got qualities of being that we are far from possessing, we can't never expect to have them. Our imagination will supply the deficiency. In fact, we'll never know that we lack anything in regard to ourselves. That is, in regard to the quality of our being, and we'll think that the only thing that we lack are appreciation, fame, money, opportunity, or some other external thing. But that in regard to ourselves, nothing is seriously lacking. This is the power that illusion has, and for this reason it's said in the work parable of the sheep and the magicians that man is hypnotized through his imagination and is under the illusion that he is a lion or an eagle when he is really a sheep, and that at the same time as a sheep he has the power of escaping from the magicians, who are too lazy or too mean to build fences to shut him in. What we have to understand from all this is that an illusion is something very real and definite in its effects. The imagination is not merely nothing but imagination, as we say. It's something very powerful indeed. It is an actual force acting universally on mankind and keeping people in a state of sleep, whether they be primitive or civilized. And until a person begins to know what it is to remember themselves, That is, to reach up to the third state of consciousness, the force that manifests itself as imagination in the two lower states of consciousness does not find its right direction and so acts against them. As we have seen, people imagine they are one, and because of this illusion, they cannot shift from where they are in themselves. Everyone is in themselves at a certain stage of themselves, and no one can shift from this stage where they are in themselves unless they see very distinctly from themselves that they are not one and the same person, but many different people, and that to continue to think they are one is an illusion. This realization, this inner perception, changes a person's feeling of themselves. It changes or begins to change their feeling of I. As long as they live in this illusion that they are one, they have a wrong feeling of I. But they don't know this, nor do they know that because of it, not only is their life all wrong and their intercourse with others all wrong, but their own evolution is made impossible. For a person cannot change as long as they ascribe to themselves oneness of being, for then everything in them is themselves. They will ascribe to themselves everything good or bad in themselves. They will be responsible for everything thought and for every thought and for every mood, though taking everything in themselves through taking everything in themselves as themselves, because if they believe that everything they think and do says they think and they will be responsible for every thought and for every mood through taking everything in themselves as themselves, because if they believe that everything in they think and do and say, they think and do and say from themselves, then it will be their own, because they make it all their own by ascribing it all to themselves. The illusion that they are always one and the same person, and that they are fully conscious of everything, and that they have will and so are in control of themselves, will totally blind them to the fact that they are not the conscious origin of all that they think and say and do. Self-observation will show. Self-observation will show them that they have practically no control of their thoughts and cannot even stop thinking if they try to do so, and that thoughts of every kind come and go in their mind whether they wish them or not. And it's the same with their feelings and their moods and their words and actions. But if they cannot admit that they are other than fully conscious of all they say and do, and in full control of their thoughts and moods and feelings, and always one and the same person, all this will remain hidden, concealed from them by the power of their own imagination. And the whole sense of themselves, their whole sense of I, and their relationship to their inner states will be false. But if a person through practical and sincere self-observation no longer believes that they're one and no longer ascribe to this imagined one person, all that exists and all that enters in their inner world, they begin to make it possible for themselves to change. For a person can receive help only through what they believe. If they believe they are one, help cannot reach them, for they ascribe everything to themselves, and so are not guilty of everything, but are, as it were, filled entirely with themselves, and there is no room for anything else. But when a person sees that they are not right to think of themselves as one, and that very many different people, and some very unpleasant ones, exist in them, and that they are by no means fully conscious and certainly have no individual will, although this goes against their vanity and they're painful to their pride. It is the starting point of change of being. There you go. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope you were able to gain some insight, some knowledge, some elevation. Join me next time for more. Let me know what you thought. Take care.